good afternoon, everyone from Berlin. As Janice introduced myself, I'm head of operations Europe at VentureBlick. And today, in the next 30 minutes or so, I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. And it's really my pleasure to welcome three very qualified gentlemen for this particular topic that we are discussing. I'll go from left to right on the slide. So first, we have André Guillaume with us. He's Vice President, Head of Brand and Community Engagement at Leaps by Bayer. For those who are not familiar with Leaps, it's the strategic impact investment arm at Bayer AG in Germany. Then next we have Steve Walsh, who's coming today from the UK to us. Steve is the Discovery and Apply Lead at Haleon. For those who have not heard about Haleon, Haleon was created as a spin-off from GlaxoSmithKline a couple of years ago in 2022 and is one of the world's leading consumer healthcare companies. And last but not least, we have Karunan Gunasekaran, usually based out of Singapore, but I heard he is actually traveling to Australia, so coming from his trip to us. He's Assistant VP of Corporate Venture Capital at IAH Group in Singapore. They run over 80 hospitals in 10 countries. So we have three panelists here with quite different backgrounds, offering different perspectives, though all expert on this topic of healthcare scouting, innovation scouting from a large organizational point of view. So on to the questions. And Andre, if I may start with you. I noticed that Bayer, through Leaps, has invested quite heavily. More than 2 billion were invested over the last 10 years in about 65 companies. Maybe to kick it off, can you elaborate a little bit on your approach, the criteria, the process that you use to identify as well as to select technologies and companies for investment?
Sure. Thanks, Kai, for the kind introduction. Thanks to VentureBlick for having me today. Yeah, we have created something that we call the 10 Leaps, which is really the 10 big guiding principles of our investment thesis, so to say. So there's things amongst them like curing cancer, or we're also in agriculture, so not only in medtech and health. So we also have, because of the heritage of our mother company, we also invest in food and ag tech. Things like sustainable protein supply, cultivated meat, things like that. So that is sort of the starting point of whenever we get approached by a startup, or whether we get a hint from another investor, or we reach out proactively. That's sort of the first check mark into the box that we do. Does it really fit to our 10 Leaps? Because this is something we set up very intentionally, where we put a lot of effort into it. It's actually something that is also aligned upon with the board of management from our mothership, since we are the corporate venture arm of Bayer. And the idea is that ideally some of those technologies that we're investing into may also be potentially acquired by Bayer. I think Chris talked about how external innovation can complement the internal R&D efforts of a big multinational, and I think that's very much the case for us as well. That we are sort of in the risks, on the risk spectrum. We are on the high risk, high reward area, where we invest into things that are very early, very risky, that our technologies are very new, potentially disruptive, and hopefully can therewith, through this foot in the door that venture capital is, because you typically don't have more than, let's say, 10, 20, maybe 30% equity in a company. That's actually a very nice way to de-risk your portfolio in investing into those risky technologies through equity.
Thank you very much, Andre. And then if I may move on to Steve, bringing in a perspective from consumer healthcare. Steve, in our pre-discussion, I found it very interesting that you said the expectations from consumers to a company like yours are changing, actually. And you talked about how that is requiring you as a company to transform. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how that specifically relates to our topic of innovation scouting here?
Sure, and thank you. It's good to be here. Yeah, I think the key overriding thing is just that consumers expect so much more. I mean, some of this is driven by pressures in public healthcare, but I think the really big stuff is around having consumers that are educated, they have access to the most amazing tools. If you look at the things that we have at our disposals compared to previous generations to understand our healthcare, it's truly transformed. So we have much more informed consumers. They're taking control of their healthcare, or certainly taking control of a much bigger proportion than they would have previously. I think also there's an acknowledgement that different solutions are needed. And it varies by the area. If you look at areas like mental health, I think consumers' first reaction is actually to reach for an app, which is really surprising when you start to think about it. And that's, very much a first line, but this space of where consumer healthcare is and the bit it occupies has transformed. People still want those products that you see on a pharmacy shelf, but it's about how we make sure they're really right for them and their circumstance and give them the tools to make those assessments.
Excellent. I think that gives us already some insights on very two different motivations to do innovation scouting, one from Bayer, one from Haleon. So let us bring in the third perspective. Karunan, your organization is quite different from the businesses that Bayer and Haleon represent. So can you also start by elaborating a little bit on your primary objectives, but also focus areas of your corporate VC arms, and how do you align what you do in your VC arm with IHH's greater mission and operations?
Thanks for the intro, Kai. So maybe before I dive into that, let me just give a flavor of what IHH Healthcare does to give a better understanding of our operations and our objectives. So we are the largest healthcare provider in Asia. Like what you mentioned earlier, we have over 80 hospitals across China, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, India, Turkey, all the way to Netherlands. The corporate VC arm, where I am, is a key function and the extension of the innovation team. So as an active healthcare player, and I might be wrong about this, but I think we are the only ones in Asia that has a corporate VC arm. So in that context, our primary objective for the corporate venture arm is firstly to create value for our patients. Second is to create value within our hospital network. And I think the third one is definitely to future-proof the whole business, the IHH business. At the core, we are actually a primary and secondary care provider. And that means clinical excellence is very important. Quality of care is very important for us. So these are the key metrics and the key missions that we want to achieve. So in line with that, the key areas we want to focus on is giving a patient-centric care and also providing value-based care. So when I say patient-centric care, what do I mean? So putting the patient at the heart of the care journey to provide a much more personalized service to our patients. And in terms of, for those who are not familiar with value-based care, is basically just providing the best overall care in the most cost-effective manner. So looking at technologies that not only improve patient value, but also managing the overall cost. So these are the things that we look at to actually be in line with the IHH mission and operations.
Great, thank you. And keep that theme of patient care in mind. I think my next question goes into that direction. But before that, I would like to jump back to André. André, you introduced LEAPS, and LEAPS came from these 10 significant challenges that you have defined in your mission to address. And I know you touched slightly on it already, but can you maybe go one step deeper and explain to us how that framework of the 10 LEAPS influences your approach to external innovation scouting and partnership formation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I started with the 10 leaps already in my last question. So those have been really deliberately put together in a sense of, and I mentioned that we're really into the game of high risk innovation. And basically, the starting point when we were thinking about the 10 leaps was, what are like the biggest problems of this planet where we can have an influence, right? I mean, we will not through minority equity investment be able to end wars on this planet or things like that, right? But there are significant challenges if you also think about the SDGs, for example, where we actually can have an influence through technology and the reach that also we as a company have. And that was really the starting point. And this is how we put together those 10 big goals. They have actually changed also in the meanwhile. We had things amongst them where we realized that with today's technologies, we are actually not able to significantly change the course of nature here. And therefore, we had to adapt them once, I believe, in the past 10 years. But actually, most of them held true. And, you see a lot of suffering still through things like cancer, or you see also that in agriculture there's this is still a big burden on this planet for sure, right? And there's just a lot of leeway to change that, and through technology we are of the strong opinion that can be done, and that's actually the only way to create profitable businesses that at the same time also create good for people and planet, is sort of the ultimate way of doing business. That's our perspective, and that's exactly the kind of businesses that we're looking for. So we call ourselves an impact investor. That means that all the interesting, exciting technologies we're investing into, they have to also deliver on that component. They cannot only be profit-making machines, but also have to really pay into that idea of people and planet. And yeah, that's sort of how the 10 leaps play into the way we go out and hunt for companies, or if we get a lot of inquiries, obviously, how we also screen them and make sure that they fit to us strategically. But I can also very much subscribe to what Chris has shown is 3 points, how things may fit into a bigger organization. To a certain degree, that also applies to us.
Excellent, thank you. And likewise, also keep in mind what you just said, the societal impact. My next question is talking about something you call Wallies. Let's leave that there as a cliffhanger for the audience, and then go into that in the next question, and move on to Steve once again. Steve, while Andre just outlined how steady their leaps, their defined challenges are over the last 10 years, only changing 1 out of 10 really over a decade, I suppose the consumer healthcare space is a bit more fast-paced. So in that context, can you talk about the key factors that you consider when selecting startups? How do you ensure the partnerships, the startups you work with, align with Haleon's mission?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think also it's partly that we're earlier in our journey than Andre leaps. I think we look for a series of things. I think probably the first is a straightforward sort of relevance. Are these companies in the space, or can they influence and transform the businesses we're actually in, which tends to be oral care, over-the-counter drugs, vitamins, mineral supplements. Then, does it really help consumers take control of their health? Is it helping them manage their condition? Is it helping them get to the right product? I think another factor is that this balance of a business mindset. We ultimately need to generate a profit, but it needs to deliver for people. We have a mission as a business that it's about healthcare for humanity. It really needs to align with that. The other one, of course, is the science. We have a basis of trusted science. Companies have to have science behind their products, or in some cases, it's something where we look at it and we say, actually, we can help with that. That's something where we can help build the evidence. So that's something we look at. The other thing that is often, I think, a challenge is whether there's really the potential with our help and all the right circumstances to move from the early adopter space to something truly mass market. I think that's often one of the biggest challenges and one of the things that we're trying to assess at the early stages.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, Karunan, talking about consumers here, let's talk about patients on your side. You elaborate a little bit on that you impact the patients' lives naturally as someone who runs over 80 hospitals. Can you give us a precise example, a concrete example for a successful partnership maybe that you have put in place and that has enhanced patient care within your institutions?
Yes, I can. So primarily, we're actually a strategic investor. So we look at both the potential investment return that can be generated through that partnership or investment, as well as the strategic value that venture brings to our hospital. So one of the examples that I can think of that delivers better patient care was with one of our portfolio companies. It is the AI-guided echo screening tech. And so this particular technology is very relevant in an A&E setting. Because all our A&Es are very packed and the waiting time can be very long, there has been problems in the A&E, especially when it concerns older patients. So older patients sometimes come into the A&E with severe heart conditions, and they have not realized it or they don't know about it, and they didn't voice it out to the medical people or professionals there. So and this has caused quite a lot of problems in the past. So this technology acted as a triaging tool. So it will to understand if there is a need to administer immediate attention for the patients who actually need urgent cardiac care. So and this tool can actually tell the results almost immediately, and it's easy to learn and to use because, as you know, there's like high turnovers in A&E settings and all that. So the medical officers were using this tool as the first point of triage when patients enter, particularly the elderly patients or patients with cardiac history. So this was one of the ways or the use cases that we have identified actually that delivered a lot of better patient care to one of the partnerships of our portfolio companies.
Great, thank you for sharing that example. And now back to André. I think I'll just keep going in that circle, in that same sequence that gives you equal share of voice, hopefully, at the end. Back to this Wally's that I mentioned before. I noticed when browsing your webpage that you talk about this return to humanity, and instead of focusing purely on return on investment, there's this term Wally, which means well-being adjusted life years. Can you explain the concept a little bit to us and describe how it influences your decision-making process?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kai. Yeah, Wally is actually one of the really, really exciting projects we're working on. At the same time, it's the most painful and probably the most difficult that we have. Because there's actually a really nice quote, which I love from Bill Gates, that is, you can only change what you can measure. And I think it's very easy to sit on a nice panel like this and to talk about impact and return for humanity and all those things and put SDG logos on your website. And but it has to have some substance, right? You have to be able to really measure what impact you're creating through your investments. And this is actually shockingly underdeveloped in this world, right? If you look around, you will find exactly what I've just mentioned, right? You will find companies that put SDG logos on their websites and there's no substance to it whatsoever, right? And we felt we want to really go beyond this. So we want to be able to invest into companies that have really that impact potential and really assess this before we invest, and B, to be able to assess the amount of impact our portfolio creates while we are being investors, right? So those are the two big goals. And ideally, we want to do that with a KPI that is universally applicable, that can be used across industries, and that is being assessed through a third party. And that's exactly what we have done with Wally. We have partnered with the Happiness Research Institute out of Copenhagen, who are actually developing these kind of KPIs entire nations. I mean, Bhutan is very well known for its efforts of happiness research, to really make sure that every dollar is invested into incrementally improving the happiness of the people living in the country. And that's kind of what we're doing as well, right? We try to invest every of our dollars into technologies that really are that have the biggest potential to really make a difference, and at the same time being a profitable business. And yeah, it's a big effort. We're working on this for a number of years already, and we have only scratched the surface. So yeah, it's a rocky road for sure.
Great. Thank you, Andre. In the meantime, I see there's one live question coming into the Q&A, so I'll improvise here a little bit and go away from the question I had noted down to that question. The question is, do healthcare giants prefer to buy companies with a ready product or to hire and develop an in-house innovation team? Any one of the three of you want to go first on that?
I'll happily dive in.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm not sure it's about preferring. I think there's no choice but to do all of the above. There are some things which clearly we should consider ourselves the experts in. We have internal experts. It's, if you like, it in the crown jewels, the real core, we should do it internally. But we don't have infinite capability. There are areas we're much less likely to build capability, even if it's important. So from our point of view, there are many areas where we would much rather partner with an external company, and help them build their business, and partner with them. It might be that in the future we'd be looking to invest or absorb in some way, but we might not. It may be a long-running partnership that remains independent. So I think it just depends on the circumstance, both the technology, how it fits, what it is, and if it's our capability.
Excellent. Andre or Karunan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think you can't be good at everything, right? The most important thing is to bring a good product to market, right? And ultimately, if it's in an area where you don't have the expertise internally, you still want to have a good product, but then you have to get it from somewhere else who they are experts with these technologies, right? And it also depends a little bit on where your shortcomings are, what your portfolio mix is, right? If you urgently need something to add to your late stage pipeline or to your in market, then you may not have a different chance than just buying something, versus if you have a full late stage pipeline, it's easy to just rely on your internal R&D.
Let me jump in as well. Like what I think both of them have said, is a constant struggle between the two concepts. But in my view, I think let the experts handle what they're good at. And sometimes it's always good to actually have an outside-in perspective to join in the whole scenery itself.
Perfect. Thank you for these additions. And thank you also for the person who asked the questions. Please keep the questions coming. I see there's a second one, and I'll try to blend that in with the next question to you, Steve. Now, the next question I had for you was, can you elaborate a little bit on the key success factors that you and your team think contribute to a successful collaboration between Haleon and startups? But I think the question that Kim here asked online kind of can be added to that, which is, in terms of science, you mentioned to what extent is evidence required? Does it need a level of clinical trials, or the mechanisms to be fully understood? So maybe you can integrate those two aspects in one answer if you want.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think, and I think it does fit with one of the key things, which is about are the expectations aligned? Quite often we find a company will come to us looking for sort of immediate distribution, which is one of our great strengths as a business. But that's probably quite a long way down the line, if we are honest, if we're talking about startup company. In terms of the level of evidence, of course, we would love to be in a position where a startup is coming to us with all the evidence we would ever like to see, perfect clinical trials sitting there. The reality is that's unusual. I think it's more that we look for we look for enough evidence that when we start to put more money in, look at things like clinical trials, we think there's a good chance of success. That we, and a lot of it's about whether the base science is there, even if there's more work to do building that out. So yeah, I think it's I think so much of it is about having this aligned view on how you're moving forwards, and the timescale, which is often a challenge in that companies like us, any large companies, are often on a different timescale to a startup business, and that can take some work from everyone to adjust.
Excellent. Now, more questions coming in, which we love to see. So basically, people here are asking about the stage of startups that you prefer to partner with. Are these mostly after approvals, at prototyping stage? Are you open to work with startups at an early stage, research phase, for example, still in university or so? Karunan, let me go to you first, and maybe you can try to answer that. Obviously, you're a hospital provider, you run hospitals, so patient care and outcomes must be essential for you. Or is it, how do you see the stage of the startup in your particular context of investment?
So obviously, the stage of the startup is important for us in the sense that usually when we actually start the ball rolling, we start talking to them when we start investing. So there are different stages in which we actually go through the venture itself. So when we actually invest in a company or we partner them, we usually expect them to have a certain level of regulatory clearance because the brand is at stake for hospitals. You are dealing with patients' lives here. Regulatory clearance and a level of security of the products is also very important when you're actually dealing with patients at the heart of your journey. So, to answer that question, I would say that we prefer something more stable. There's where the product is tested, there's regulatory clearance, and it's safe for the patients. But having said that, we also welcome startups from earlier stages because, as you probably know, we do have quite an extensive ecosystem. So we run a lot of pilots within our hospital network, and through that, we collect extensive feedback from our stakeholders. So when we actually put this all into consideration, we actually understand whether certain products might be earlier in their stages, but might have real value that is delivered within our hospital network. So it varies with the startup, also varies with the different use cases that it presents within our hospital network.
André and Steve, may I also pose that question to you? What's your perspective on the stage? Do you have a preference? Do you have a sweet spot for the stage of the startup or a company that it needs to be in? Steve, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I think the first thing just to preface it with is it probably depends on which group within our business you're talking to. There are inevitably other groups that look at later stage. From my point of view, it's looking at really pretty early stage startups. So from my point of view, it's important, I think, that we're working with someone who's moved beyond the idea stage. They need to have some tangible evidence that there really is something there. Often, I think the point when an academic is talking about spinning out has sort of got half the plan in place. It is the earliest we would look to engage, other than for basic research purposes. So I think there's a fairly broad band of when we would look to engage, but it has to move beyond an idea.
Andre, how is Bayer looking at that?
Yeah, for Leaps, it might be a little different because we are in the high risk arena. So we are also very, very welcoming early stage technologies, maybe not pre-seed or university level, because they are very rarely in ticking the boxes that Steve just mentioned, which are obviously also important to us. So they need to be beyond ideation phase. There needs to be some level of IP protection, and most importantly, that there need to be a founder team, not just one person, ideally, that is competent and has really the strength and the skill set to put a company forward. And that's actually the things that we're looking at: strong technology, strong team, and ideally also strong affiliation to external advisors, universities, whatever. Those are usually the formulas to success.
Excellent. Now, I think we have time for one more question, and I'd like to take the one which is currently shown last year on the chat, which is: from which countries do you see most exciting healthcare startups coming these days? And Andre, I'd like to stay with you for a moment here, because on your website, when I was browsing this, I found a very interesting study that you published with BCG recently, and it looked at how optimistic society feels about breakthrough science. You looked at different results in 13 countries. And maybe can you comment on if that directs your innovation scouting, these results or not? And then also address the question from the participant here, if you see a bias towards one or the other country or group of countries.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. The answer is probably no, because we really look globally, and we want to invest into technologies that ideally have an impact on a global scale. But what's really interesting about the results of the study is that you would guess that technologies that have such a potential to really change the world in every direction, such as AI in health, or CRISPR-Cas, gene editing, things like that, that there would be more data points out there to really get a sense what consumers, who ultimately at some point need to utilize those technologies, what their hopes and dreams and fears are about those technologies. And we had unfortunately found out that there is very, very little, and that's why we teamed up with BCG and put this study together, that actually finds the more advanced a country is in a certain technology area, the more skepticism and fears is actually. That's sort of the super high level summary, but it's worth looking into the results of the study. You can find them all on our website. And maybe to answer also the second part of the question, unfortunately, there is still a very big bias towards US, because the US is just very, very good at taking smart ideas from the academic level into startup creation. And I think that's where they are still far ahead, Europe and also Asia. But there's also, pockets. I think Singapore is a great example. Singapore is a great place for that. Israel is. There's also great companies in the UK, some in Germany. So there is other markets, but the US is still far ahead.
Excellent. But I want to also hear from the other two panelists. Steve, what's your perspective on the country insights here?
Yeah, I agree with everything said. I think some of it is driven by these quite big trends around funding, how really evolved the ecosystems are in different countries. I think perhaps consumer healthcare, there's a slightly different angle, in that what we do see are slightly different solutions emerging from different countries due to different pressures, different cultural influences, different just societal views on things, which actually is fantastic. We get this real diversity of solutions, even if it's actually going after the same target. So I don't think I could pick one and say that's the one. for the most exciting, but you see these sort of pockets of amazing diversity, which I think is a real strength.
Karunan, finally over to you. Your company has a very Asian-focused footprint, I believe, but how is that on the investment side?
So the thing here is that, I mean, we usually try to invest in companies that have operations or plans to have operations within the market that we operate in. But having said that, the health tech industry, at least in my view, in Asia is very early. It is growing at an alarming pace, but it's still early, and a lot of influence is coming from US, for example. And so you can see that though, and the funding as well is also, most of the players there are coming from the US. So people in the markets that we operate usually try to get some presence in US as well to get the FDA approval or the CE approval to measure up to the startups in US and then come back to Asia. So I think we are seeing that kind of trends going on right now. So it's still early stages, but I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in all these different pockets of spaces.
Excellent. That's a perfect last sentence. Thank you to the three of you for this panel discussion. I'd like to hand it back over to Janice to close our webinar.
Thank you so much, Kai, Andre, Steve, and Karunan for all that sharing.